everyone. This is AstridTheHorrorGirl, and this is Press Start to Scream. Welcome on in. I am joined by a magnificent, wonderful, incredible guest. JenIsOnline. Hello, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm so good. You are so sweet.
I'm just telling truths.
Oh my gosh.
Purely telling truths.
Absolute sweetheart. I have been so excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you for being here. I know that you are a fan of horror games, though you play all sorts of things, but
Yeah. Primarily, I would say horror, and then also horror light. I like to utilize that euphemism as like a indicator that like the game is supposed to be scary and is scary to some people, but it's not really scary to me. Like Dark Souls is scary to some people, which is crazy. But it's not scary to me.
yeah, it's always interesting how sometimes the settings of games, like just the idea of where it is and where it takes place, is that alone is uncomfortable enough, which I feel like is the vibe that Dark Souls is going for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I explained to people several times on my own stream how, like, I'll play through all the Amnesia games. It's fine. I love those games.
Mm-hmm.
And any Resident Evil, I'm cool with it. I'm down. I'm
Yeah.
I'm down with all that. I cannot play Fallout. It's too scary.
Fallout is scary for you.
I That setting makes me so incredibly uncomfortable to spend more than half an hour at a time in it. I'm just like, I need to go outside and be calm now.
Yeah, okay. So like post-apocalyptic sort of vibes. See, that's scary to a lot of people, but I've never really thought of it to be that scary. You know, when I'm like watching movies or playing games in post-apocalyptic sort of things or post-war specifically for Fallout, I just feel like in the moment, if I try to put myself in those shoes, I would be the first to die. This can't be real because I'm done. Goodbye. But they make really good stories for sure, though. However, I do think that post-apocalyptic sort of settings are cheap in a way because it is kind of an easy way for authors or for creators to lessen the lore and the fullness of the world because everyone died, so it's just these people.
I can see what
It,
you mean. Kind of,
yeah.
if you're not going to address the apocalypse itself, then it's very easy to just say, oh, this happened after whatever that was.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm
I
trying to think of like another game setting that like freaks me out but doesn't really freak that many other people out. And I would say that like have you played Alan Wake?
Oh, I love Alan Wake.
I love that game. It scared me so much and it wasn't really like that scary, but the
I
idea of it really just freaked me out.
Alan Wake 2 is coming out this year.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
So am I. And I find it interesting that Remedy said when they announced it that this will be their first survival horror game.
Huh.
And so my mind was thinking, it's interesting that they don't consider, I understand them not considering it a survival horror game, but
Sure.
perhaps not a horror game at all was interesting. And they went on to clarify Alan Wake originally was an action game that had some horror in it, but in this one, it's going to be a much more focused on the horror of the game and have a much more survival horror way of playing and way of going about it. So
Interesting.
I got more excited.
Yeah, and that makes me super curious because when I hear survival horror, I think games like 7 Days to Die or Green Hell or
Okay.
like survival games where you have to like make camps and like do that. So I'm very curious of where on the spectrum of survival games they're going to put it on.
If I had to guess, I would assume that it's going to be more in the realm of Resident Evil and Silent Hill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to me, when I hear survival horror, I think of the way that it was labeled as such in the late 90s and early 2000s, which I kind of tell people now, like, classic survival horror. The
Right,
idea
right.
of save points, watching your ammunition to conserve it, conserving
Yeah.
your health supplies, and therefore you have to judge which enemies are worth killing and which ones are not, what risks are worth taking and which one is not. And more than likely, it doesn't have to be, but more than likely it's like fixed cameras or third person, something like that.
Sure, sure.
That's the classic survival horror way, but I try to sneak in the word classic because that definition has changed and it doesn't feel as encompassing of horror as a broader genre now,
Sure.
since, well, even during the 90s there were horror games that weren't what people were calling survival horror. They would call them horror adventure games. And
See, that's what I would refer to Resident Evil as is like horror adventure or like you mentioned sort of the action with horror elements that Alan Wake has said they are.
mm-hmm.
That's what I would say Resident Evil is versus like survival, but I can totally understand like the need to conserve your bullets and things. It reminds me of Dead Space, the original one.
Yeah.
Uh, if you could soft lock yourself out of doing stuff because you don't
Oh yeah.
conserve your bullets, it's kind of the worst.
And that was the whole idea and basis of classic survival horror. That
Yeah.
was the idea was, uh-oh, looks like you did too much killing,
Mm.
and now you can't go on. And it's,
Or too much missing.
yeah, or too much missing, one of the two, or both.
Yeah, right.
And it puts you in that situation where you have to go, well, I guess I'll restart the game. And the thing is, back then, that was a very accepted model of game playing
Oh yeah.
because everything was based upon arcade styles of gaming where
You start over when you die,
you start
sort of
over
thing.
when you die and you have to put in more quarters and stuff
Yep.
like that, because
Pay
that
my
was
money.
the mentality. And so
Yeah.
it took a while, longer than it should have for sure, for game developers and game publishers to understand that there was a difference between somebody going down to their local arcade and putting in quarters to try again, rather than somebody who owns the game and brought it
Right.
home to play.
Right. Uh, I just remember, um, luckily I played Dead Space specifically in like a public space. So I was told, hey, you need to save your bullets or like you need to do this or that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want you to restart the game or have to restart the level
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. And I totally didn't understand it until I didn't listen and did it anyway, and then was soft locked out of a boss fight. And I was just sitting there running in circles trying to figure out how to kill this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so at the end of the day, if I was at the arcade, I probably would be like, all right, I'm done, and then not put more quarters in.
It's interesting. Well, first of all, that's happened to everyone, not necessarily with Dead Space, but with survival horror, classic survival horror in general.
True, true.
And it's funny because I've played classic survival horror stuff my whole life, and I take that approach into pretty much every game that I play, and it sometimes it has gotten me into trouble because I've been trying out Elden Ring,
Yeah.
and with that, people have been like, why aren't you exploring? I'm just like, I don't want to die. You kidding? Explore? The game told me to go this way. If I go into a room, I'm going to get jump scared and insta-killed. I'm not going to have that.
Explore in this economy?
Yeah, I can't be having that. And it just
Mm-hmm.
totally defied what all of my gaming expectations had been up
Right.
to a certain point, because I like live and breathe survival horror. I know what the rules are. I understand how this works.
Yeah.
Unless it's not survival horror, in which case I have to play like a child and just go, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this is. Why is it this way?
I'm trying to think of another survival horror game that I played recently. BioShock 1. Um, Fantastic game. And I don't know if you've played it before. Have you played the BioShock series?
Oh yeah, I love BioShock.
The way that you can just miss too much or kill too many things and just be out of bullets and just have to whack people um, is so stressful and so fun. And I feel like they do such a good job at like creating this atmosphere that is scary to think about, but not necessarily scary to be in. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we call games like BioShock, specifically that first person experience that has a bit of things like RPG elements like leveling up, and
Right,
but are
right.
in a
Leveling up.
but are in mostly a straight line. We call them immersive sims.
Hmm.
And BioShock it was the spiritual successor to the 90s series called System Shock. The same
Ah,
the
yes.
same writers worked on it, which is why I'm trying to tell people, hey, when System Shock, the remake, which I believe just came out,
Mm.
when it has the same exact plot twist as BioShock, don't don't think that BioShock did it first. It didn't. System Shock did that first, and then BioShock stole it. And this isn't a remake stealing BioShock's new thing. It's not. That's already happened in the 90s.
No, but then it's like, okay, so BioShock stole from System Shock, and then Bendy and the Ink Machine and the successor, Bendy and the Dark Revival, stole from BioShock. They even said it. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
this is directly influenced by the BioShock series. And you could feel it. The elements of the games are there. So it's so I forgot about System Shock being a thing. That is such a nice reminder of such a difficult game. I had a problem with it at least.
I mean, no, it is hard, and immersive sims are hard in general.
Yeah.
Back from Deus Ex, and Thief, the old Thief games were immersive sims.
Mm-hmm.
And the new Prey was also an immersive sim as well.
I still need to play that one. I think it's gonna be so fun.
God, I have such mixed feelings on new Prey, because
Oh,
I like an immersive sim, but
yeah.
also the 2006 Prey was a
Fantastic.
first person shooter that was a horror game.
Yeah.
So it's this action packed alien shooter that kind of has these feels of Doom, and
Right. Yeah.
also being just like this really creepy, disturbing sort of alien invasion horror kind of game. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to play a remake of that. And nope, that's not what I got. And I feel I feel mixed on that, because Prey literally ends with there will be a Prey 2, and then we never
Yeah.
had one.
That's true. And then they gave us a remake of the same game, and they said, "What do you mean? It is two."
Yeah, and then
Just
it's not even like a true remake. It's like an entirely different thing. And they said, so we've changed it from first person shooter to immersive sim, and instead of those alien things, we're having different alien things. And it's like, yo, just name it something else. It'll be
Right.
fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to think another game that has done something like that, where they've remade the game and it's been different. But you did mention Doom, and those games are really good. I don't know, I've played only about two of them, but I really enjoyed that remake. But it felt the same, just different.
I so fun facts about New Doom, because id Software really reached into inspiration from the environment and monster design of Doom, but the
Yeah,
gameplay of Quake. And I always
for
thought that
sure.
that was interesting
That is
because
interesting.
like I always had like, yeah, Doom and Quake, they're both fantastic, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
combining them, I think it worked. I think that it worked really, really well. Um, but God, I would love for there to be a true Doom remake in that sense.
True. Yeah. I would love that. Hi, if you're listening, Doom creators, we want this.
John Carmack, I know that you're busy working on the Oculus Rift and stuff, but I need you to make Doom again.
Yeah, please. Doom was one of the first horror games that I've ever played, actually. And I maybe I didn't play it. I watched my dad play it, which I think
Mm.
that counts.
You know what's interesting is depending on where you first played Doom, it was either a horror game or an action packed first person shooter.
Yeah, you're right.
It's interesting because you'll have to hear my testimony that the best Doom game is Doom 64. For the fact that Doom 64 was pretty determined to have a very scary vibe to it. And Doom 3, of course, is the one that's famous for going full horror in a sense and kind of abandoning what Doom had started to become known for after Doom 2.
Right, right.
But Doom 64 was like the great in between of like, it's not as we're going full horror as Doom 3, um, but we're also leaning more into the atmosphere while keeping the same control vibes as OG Doom. And nothing makes me happier than the fact that Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, both of those, they assume that because they're not really remakes as much as they're requels, they're rebooting the series, but also they're sequels to the series. They canonically happen after Doom 64, and I'm like, oh, thank God they included Doom 64 in the canon. That makes me so happy.
Big agree. Now I am sitting here looking up Doom games, and there's a lot. There's so many of them.
There's a few, yeah.
I didn't realize. Huh.
Question for you.
Today I learned. Yeah, question. What's up?
As a dungeon master, and a fantastic dungeon master you are,
Oh, wow, thank you.
I'm curious because I will lurk on the things that you DM. What are your thoughts on horror and role playing in a TTRPG setting?
Wow. So you're talking to someone who really enjoys including elements of horror in a
Mm-hmm.
TTRPG setting in general. So, hi, I love it. I think it is so fun and fascinating. I like to refer to myself as a horror DM because I enjoy, or a horror writer, rather. Um, and I just enjoy the occult, cults, literally. I
Mm-hmm.
also enjoy a little descriptive body horror every now and then, especially when the
Mm-hmm.
adventurers are murdering things willy-nilly.
Yeah.
I enjoy mutations and things that can happen in the Feywild. And I just like to make things pretty grotesque. I want someone to be gritting their teeth at the table at me, being like, "Oh, that was gross," and I'm just like, "You're welcome," and we move forward. But I also there's so many settings I would say in TTRPG that are horror without me having to change anything at all, like Curse of Strahd
Mm.
or the Call of Cthulhu games. Uh,
Love Call of
there's just, Call of Cthulhu is so fun. I played it for the first time about 2 months ago,
Cthulhu.
and 100% want to play it again. It was so fun.
The TTRPG that hates its players. I love it
It's
so
true.
much.
I was the only one that lived. It was
Oh, good
great.
job.
I know. Um, but I think that games, as well as TTRPG games, can benefit from having a little heart beating, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think getting antsy and getting nervous about what's happening, and also the descriptions being immersive, and like truly like painting a picture, and things just sort of being grotesque to the point where you want to know the lore of why things became the way they did. Want more of that. I'll eat it right up.
Mm.
And I'll write about it. And I'll perform it on TTRPG because it's just my favorite. Um, but yeah, no, I am a 10 out of 10, two thumbs up, absolute yes. Please add horror elements to basically everything.
This is good. I feel the same way.
Okay, so listen, there's a game called Pokemon Channel on the GameCube,
Okay.
and it's a video game in Pokemon where you have to watch TV with Pokemon. Woohoo! Very cutesy, very wholesome. There is a segment of the game where you have to delve into a dark, scary cave where all the ghost Pokemon are. And the game did such a good job at making a segment of the game scary. It felt like there was risk going into a cave as just your average TV watcher at home with Pikachu. Um, and I just thought it was such a good little part of the game, and so much so I remember it like I don't know, I played it when it came out, so like almost 20 years later, and I think that there could be benefit. There's other wholesome games like Stardew Valley has scary aspects of it to it, but it's mostly caves. I would
Mm-hmm.
say the cave in Disney Dreamlight Valley is also scary. So like there's I'm finding a pattern now that I'm talking about it out loud, but I think that there's benefit in adding a little scariness to your storytelling. Something scary, something worth fighting or worth hiding from.
First of all, I agree. Secondly, I do love to make that same point to a lot of people is that horror permeates all the other genres in a certain way.
Hmm.
It's not by itself. Like, I would say that the horror genre by itself is, I always define it as something is in the horror genre if its number one goal and intention is to scare or frighten or unnerve its audience, and that's its goal and objective. Whether it succeeds or not, it's
Sure.
not the point, but that's what it's trying to do. But I cannot think of a classic Disney film that doesn't at some point venture into something horrifying in
Yeah.
order to establish why the forces of darkness in this story need to be stopped. Because when I have thought about, well, I think an extreme example would be like Little Mermaid. Ursula has like these souls trapped in like her soul prison area where she just torments them endlessly and wants to do that to the kingdom she is intending to rule over. They didn't have to go that hard, but they did, because it's worth mentioning that this is an evil that needs to be stopped.
Yeah, and there's so much backstory that can be involved with horror. There's so much uh, immersion that can happen with scary games. Like one of the biggest things that I always say is I always feel the most involved and immersed in scary games and
Mm-hmm.
scary parts of stories because at that moment it's just me and that game. I could feel like I'm absolutely there, like with the Amnesia games or Alien
Mm-hmm.
Isolation. You
Mm-hmm.
play that game in the dark and you're there. You are literally the one in the game hiding because yeah, I'm immersed. It's scary and I am feeling that fear.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm watching movies like Disney or going into the horrifying backstories of all these villains and other stories, I truly feel like sometimes I empathize and like the villains more because
Mm-hmm.
I learned more about them.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't usually give that to the princess who's asleep on a rock.
Like, what the hell was she doing on that rock? Jesus.
I know, how boring.
Mm-hmm.
Kissed by a man. Gross. How about ruling the seas, huh?
Yeah. Works with me. I also think that it's worth, in that regard, how little that games have to offer in the genre of reverse horror, in which you are the horrible evil. There was Carrion that was released not too long ago where you play as the big monster blob thing that was eating a whole bunch of scientists and soldiers and ripping them apart, and when you consumed them your body got bigger and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Loved that, and it's fantastic. um Arguably reverse horrors classic, there was Manhunt, where you were this, even though it can go either way, like you're trying to kill people as gruesomely as possible, and
Right.
you get more points for that, essentially. And I always find it interesting how a lot of games, if they try to do something adjacent to reverse horror, they sometimes abandon the horror concept altogether.
Yeah.
And it no longer becomes like this is scary or disturbing. They're just like, oh, just have fun doing some killing. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's what
Hmm.
makes reverse horror such a scarce and small genre, and something I'd love to see more in.
I would also like to see more in, and I think when it comes to reverse horror, you kind of lose the fear when you're in control. Like, have you played Alien Isolation?
I have.
So halfway through the game, as you know, you get a flamethrower.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly the game is not that scary anymore.
Mm.
And you get a little more control. And as the monster, you feel more empowered. I would say a good example of this is playing In Silence. It's a six-person game where one person plays the monster. There's a lot of games like this, but this is the one I thought of. And you have in-game voice chat, and the monster has to find people based on echolocation, essentially, and blind sight. And you run around as the monster feeling not as scared, but more
Mm-hmm.
determined to murder.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're playing the survivors, essentially, um, you're freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying so hard not to get caught by your friend, even though it is your friend. It is
Mm-hmm.
so scary. And I think it's just, the predator versus prey situation
Mm-hmm.
where if we're the predator, we're not going to be as scared because
Mm-hmm.
we got this. And if we're the prey, then oh boy, time to hide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty difficult genre to work in, I think, which I promise I didn't intend it to go here, but this is why you should play Vampire the Masquerade.
I mean, if
Um,
you wanted it to go here, whether or not, it's fine. I'm happy we're here.
um, I so the idea of Vampire the Masquerade is just a part of World of Darkness,
Yeah.
which Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Wraith the Oblivion, Mage the Ascended, Hunter the Reckoning, Demon the Fallen. I might be missing one or two, but the ideas of all of these, you are the horror. You
Right.
are the scary thing in the night. You are the terrifying monstrosity that humans are afraid to speak of.
Yeah.
That is who you are. And it's still terrifying to play this because
Interesting.
well, just in Vampire the Masquerade, for example, the normal human that you basically, if someone made the mistake of trying to mug you in a dark alley, if they made the mistake of trying to mug a vampire, that's it for them. That they're
Yeah.
done. They might wake up the next day finding themselves that they have been enslaved to a vampire if that vampire was really cruel. But
Yeah, for
there's no
sure.
way that they're gonna get anything out of that vampire. They're just not even on the same level remotely. It's not even a competition.
Right.
But a vampire coming up against a werewolf, terrifying.
Yeah.
That's
That
not
sounds
a
awful.
situation that a vampire wants to find themselves in. And then there's what comes in to make this real terrifying is magic that can't be understood.
Right.
The masquerade itself is the idea that we're hiding amongst humans because back in the day when humans thought that they could just open a Bible and point a crucifix at us, that it would scare us away. It never did. But now they have things like grenades and high-powered rifles, and those are terrifying. And we could be hunted down as vampires. So the masquerade is necessary to not let humans know that our kind exists, kind of thing. And if you risk violating it, it may not just be humans you have to worry about. It may be other vampires that know what you did and think of you as a liability. And if you're just a 5-year-old vampire out here, not that you're 5 years old, but like you've only
Right. Been a vampire for 5 years.
yeah, you're not going to last against a vampire who's lived for 400 years that decided, yeah, you're not going to make it.
Right.
You'd be
You're
done. Yeah. So it's this balancing act of trying to, well, also in that lore, you're always hungry.
Yeah.
And you literally, like, not figuratively, you literally have a beast that lives inside you that wants human blood.
Yeah.
And in order to maintain your composure, you're constantly fighting against it. And that's pretty horrifying too, because you're always that step away from losing control. And one of the things I love about World of Darkness is it understands reverse horror much further than I would say any other attempt to capture it.
Right.
I just want to see more of that in video games is all.
That's completely fair, and you explaining this game makes me want to play it. So,
It
like,
worked.
exactly. You're like, success! Woohoo!
Mm-hmm.
What I can think of while you're speaking is that being the monster, you still have to have a threat. There has to be a threat, because if you're the top of the food chain, like a lot of games are now, like you're created, like I said in Silence, and the thing that I mentioned, there is no other threat to you as the person at the top. However, there's games like Deceit or Among Us where the threat is everyone else around you.
Yeah.
Where you are the killer, but people can deduce and get you literally thrown out or murdered. And there's a threat there, so that makes those games a little scary, especially for people who are bad at lying or don't necessarily do very well in social deduction games. But I'm trying to think of other games that kind of reveal that you're the monster all along, and that makes the games really fun. And the first one that comes to mind is Little Nightmares,
Mm,
where you're playing this thing that has all of these threats, but it turns out that you were the threat all along, and that
mm,
you were just trying to be confined.
yeah.
And that's so interesting to me too, because now whoever the little thing is goes off to rule the world, whatever the end of the game is, I don't know. But
Right.
whatever happens after the credits, you know. Um, but I find those stories to be really interesting. Uh, Social deduction is one of my favorite categories. I love lying to people. Quote that.
Mm-hmm.
Jen is online. I love lying to people. 2023. And I also love the immersion that is given through twists that happen at the very end of a story.
Mm.
Um, the Dead Space twist was meh for me, but the Little Nightmares twist was really, really good for me. I liked that one a lot.
On an interesting note, there have been social deduction games for a long time, and they only recently got that name.
Interesting.
They've often been called games with a defector system, or
Huh.
uh, like defector systems games. And that is to illustrate that not everyone's on the same team, but you don't know who the other person that's not on your team is. And I appreciate that it's called social deduction as a genre now. It just fits so much better.
I agree. But I mean, at the end of the day, like Mafia, the card game
Yeah,
that was like made in like the 80s or something. Um, that's like the original social deduction game. Was that not called social deduction? And
I
now I'm like
don't
looking it
think that
up.
it was. I don't want to look it up either.
Hidden roll and bluffing.
Ah,
Hidden roll games. Okay, I mean that's fair. I'll take that.
yeah, yeah. I think that it's necessary to kind of point out that maybe one day we will look at a genre like, for instance, we were talking at the start of this, survival
Hmm.
horror. When I think
Yeah.
of survival horror, I now found it necessary to start with saying classic survival horror if I mean Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or
Yeah.
games of that vibe, because now with, you mentioned 7 Days to Die and Green Hell, games like that exist and they borrow from a genre called survival, but hey,
Yeah.
also they're a horror game. The
They're very
term
different.
very much applies, but they mean different things. So
Totally different things.
at
Yeah.
some point, I think that some group of people are going to come along with a better describer, a better genre name to put them both in different areas, to say this is a part of horror, this is a part of horror. They're called differently, just to God help us, so that
Yeah.
when somebody shows up and says, hey, I want you to play this survival horror game, and then I'll go, oh great, I love survival horror, and then I end up playing like Darkwood, and I'm like, oh, I didn't think this is what you meant.
Sure.
um and then I don't end up telling somebody who's a big fan of 7 Days to Die, oh, you'll love this survival horror game, and I end up recommending like Them and Us, and they'll go, oh, this isn't what I thought you meant, because
Hmm.
we need that. I love adding classic to the front, but I feel like it only gets me so far.
It does. It does because it's horror has really stretched into a big umbrella, which
Mm-hmm.
is great because I have this argument with people every couple months of like the difference between horror and gore, and how I feel that they're very different. However, they are both horror. They are just different.
Fun fact: there's a actual genre term for describing horror that depends on gore, and it's called splatter.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
and
would you call it
this
splatter horror or just a splatter game?
um I've heard it said both ways, but I think when you're talking about games, it'd probably be best to say splatter horror.
Yeah,
Uh,
that would make sense.
in movies, it's assumed that when you say splatter, that you mean gore-driven horror film.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine Outlast would be a splatter horror game.
I would agree.
Yeah, that the game is gross and I'll never play it, but it's just me putting two and two together here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I've definitely had individuals ask me like, what horror games am I excited for? And I tend to play shooter games, and I tend to play immersive little storytelling games. And I tend to stray away from things that are overly gory, just
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not cool with it. I think it's gross. I
Mm-hmm.
like describing gore at the TTRPG
Sure.
sessions, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't like watching it. I don't like movies that are gore fests, and I don't like watching games that are gory. It just
Mm-hmm.
isn't for me, and that's fine. But I just am so incredibly convinced that they are different, and now I've learned that they are. So,
It's true, because at the end of the day, horror is trying to make you uncomfortable, but you have to cross the lines yourself.
yeah,
It's okay to say, hey, I don't want to experience this for fun. That doesn't sound
exactly.
like fun. And I really wish that more people, I haven't experienced it so much in gaming, but definitely in films, I wish that people would be more cautious when they recommend things to people that are in the horror genre, because
Yeah,
not everyone's down for the same things.
that's true. At the end of the
I,
day, like I'll play Viscera Cleanup Detail for hours, but it's not the same
yeah.
as Outlast or other games that are super gory. Outlast is just top of mind.
Mm-hmm. I've had friends that were trying to help someone because they were like, I really want to play a horror game. Where should I start? And they just started throwing out titles. And I'm like, you need to be quiet, because we have no idea where they are in their journey for horror. And if someone just says, I want to play a horror game, what should I play? And they've never played one before, I don't think it's appropriate to just say, oh, Alien Isolation.
Yeah.
I also don't think it's appropriate to straight up be, oh, Resident Evil, like the first one, because both of those games have the equal potential, but in different ways, to turn people off from the genre entirely. It is worth asking, well, what kind of games do you like otherwise? Or have you played horror games already? What are you looking for in a game? Because I have answers depending on where people are in their journey with the genre, and it would be such a rude thing for me to do, to just immediately show up shouting, oh, here's insert most extreme thing I could possibly think of. Like,
Ah, yes.
that's a terrible thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
but I also don't want to give them something that's mechanically extremely difficult either. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
unless that's something that they want. If they say, like, if it's worth asking those questions, if they say, oh yeah, I played that, but it was too easy, you can go, okay, maybe try this. It's worth
Yeah.
it. It really is worth it. And I think that people are just, they see someone asking for recommendations and they jump at the opportunity to just shout out their favorite thing.
Right. That's for sure. And I do think that there's also like a tailoring that you can do to talk with someone about what kind of game they want to play, because I feel like recommendations is also a pry essentially for a little more closeness with the people around you. Like, hey, what are your recommendations? Let's talk about games. Let's get a conversation going. Instead of just being given like a list. Like I would never recommend Kill It with Fire to somebody who is so incredibly scared of spiders because it's a spider
Right.
game.
Right.
But maybe I love it and I do because I think it's so silly. Um, but they would probably absolutely hate me for recommending it if they ended up playing it. So if I spent the moments just kind of like chatting with them about what they like to play, if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't already know, then you'd benefit as well as be able to have more conversations in the future with that person because maybe they enjoy the game that you recommended and they
Mm-hmm.
want to talk with you more about the game that you recommended and also get more recommendations in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's just better all around to be more conversational with people.
Yeah, I absolutely feel that way. Absolutely.
I actually have a perfect example of people shouting out recommendations to me where I played the game and ended up hating it, and that
Mm.
would be Doki Doki Literature Club.
Mm. Okay.
Played the game, um, ended up enjoying it. However, I had never played a game that read your game, like your files on your computer, to
Mm.
to be very meta
Yeah.
and really scare you in a literal way. Like, hey, this is your name. I was like, oh, I hate this.
Mm. Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
my first experience with it. Since then, I've played many like it, like Pony Island, Buddy Simulator, all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're really fun. But when I first played this Doki Doki game, have you played the game first off?
I have. Yes.
Okay. It's triggering. And
Yeah.
I think people enjoy seeing people's reactions to the trigger. And I'm not really into that.
Right.
Uh I'm not into shock value and the themes that were presented in that game. It's not really my cup of tea. It is a lot of people's cup of tea, and I've definitely met people who enjoy that. Um, so when I was playing the game, I felt pretty scarred, actually. I was like, I wasn't ready for this. How can we play this on Twitch? First off, and then all sorts of stuff. It was so freaky, and I wish someone would have told me a little bit more about it. Because all I was told was don't look it up, don't look into the game, just play it.
Honestly, I really dislike when people do that because
Agreed.
I say you have to give me something cuz unless the only people I will trust that from are people who absolutely know everything about me.
Yeah, which is not a lot.
Yeah, and there's very few people that recommend me things that know everything about me.
Right.
And when someone shows up and they're just like, "Oh, don't do it. Don't look at things. Don't get spoiled." And first of all, for me, I'm like, "You don't know me. I don't even care about spoilers at all. That's not even who
Mm-hmm.
I am. I don't talk about spoilers just for the fact that most people I know are not like me, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
care.
Mm-hmm.
You just tell me what's in this game."
Yeah.
Um,
And
but even in a less degree than that, like there are some things you have to be straightforward with
agreed.
because some content is very real life triggering shit, and
Mm-hmm.
surprising someone with something like that is incredibly rude. I
It's also disgusting.
No, it is. That's
It's
why
it's
I've built a long spreadsheet of all these horror games I've played that just list all the potentially triggering stuff and gameplay style and things in it, just without spoiling it, to be like, hey, this is in the game, just so you
right.
know.
Yeah. I do think and when I played Doki Doki Literature Club is when I started setting boundaries into like the kinds of things that I'll be spoiled about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm very much the kind of person that's opposite of you. Like, I don't even want someone to tell me that someone is their least favorite character right when we meet them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, well, then you're telling me this person sucks in some way. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, you spoiled my opinion about this person before I even get to know this person. So I'm pretty stickler about spoilers,
Mm-hmm.
because I just want to experience things the way that this person who's spoiling it got to do.
Right.
And I after playing Doki Doki was like, okay, so I have to look up the triggers before playing games now.
Mm-hmm.
Not just for me, but because I have people watching, I have to do it for them too. And I actually utilize a website called doesthedogdie.com. You
Oh
can
yeah.
type in all sorts of media on there. It's not just it doesn't tell you if it doesn't only tell you if the dog dies. It tells you
Indeed.
much more than that. And so for Life is Strange, I played through that series, a pretty triggering series.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for some, not for me. And I wrote down the triggers just to be like, hey, here's the things that happened. However, while doing that, I am spoiling the game for myself in some aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And that does kind of suck. But ultimately, I care more about like the safety of our minds
Mm-hmm.
than the shock value of Doki Doki style shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would recommend that game to somebody, Doki Doki.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would tell them the themes if they cared to know. I'd be
Yeah.
like, hey, this game is not what it seems, and it does
Mm-hmm.
that on purpose. But I want you to know that, like, hey, this happens. So if you're cool with, like, that happening in the game, you can play the game. Other than that, I think it's good to set boundaries. It's also good to, like, if you have people watching you play a game, it's good to upfront tell them the possible triggers they might be seeing because I don't want to have a damaging reputation for doing things. At the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, the game kind of has the damaging reputation, but I think that makes sense.
It does. It
Okay,
does.
okay.
Horror is meant to be, as I said, unsettling. It's meant to scare its audience. It's meant to disturb its audience and
Mm-hmm.
anything that it can do. And also, like I said, you have to let the audience cross the line. You can't make them. It's just going to, you're just going to get a lot of angry people.
Oh yeah.
And you're also going to potentially be hurting people. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I am 100% for horror creators doing any kind of fucked up shit that they want in their game. Go for
Yeah.
it. It's cool.
Yeah.
But at least let people know.
Sure. You know what's very interesting, and it just came to mind? A not scary game, Grand Theft Auto 5,
Yeah.
has a scene that is horrifying that you, the player, are forced to do. And it is shocking. And for individuals listening, it's a torture scene, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot. I literally could not play it. I had to like give it to someone who was willing to play that scene, and then I
Mm-hmm.
came back after. But it's unavoidable. And I think it's just so interesting that like horror is everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like playing more games now.
Well, I'm not going to stop you from playing more games. You know, one of them could even be Vampire the Masquerade. It's pretty
I would
incredible.
love to do that if you'd be willing to host my first time.
But of course. Last question for you.
Sure.
This one I usually ask first, but I saved it for last this time.
Oh, okay.
What's your favorite horror game?
Oh gosh.
I know. You get to think about it, and you don't
I
don't have to.
am.
You don't have to limit it to just one. You can just start throwing them out and going, "Well, I love this one. Oh, and this one. Those are always good too."
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed Bendy and the Ink
Oh,
Machine.
I love that game. Yes.
I thought it was just the right amount of cute, scary, and engaging, and it was so much fun. I also, oh gosh, I really, really enjoyed just the trippiness of Alan Wake and
Mm.
spending the entire time being like, what is happening? And still not getting an answer at the end. Um, and oh man, I really enjoy the let's see. Me scrolling through my games. I also really enjoy Green Hell. It's a
Okay.
survival game where uh You have to survive essentially on an island. You're a scientist and you lose your wife, who is also a scientist. Well, she's a linguist actually, so she can communicate with the people on the island. And then you have to find her. That's kind of the general gist of the story. But you have to survive, and the creators went so in depth into creating a survival game that they looked up like what you would actually need to do to survive if this were to happen. Like if you cut your leg, this is what you would need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you have to do those things and wait that long in game time, obviously. But and it's so in depth, and I enjoy focusing on a lot of stuff. So I really, really like Green Hell, and I would recommend it to anyone who really wants a fantastic and in-depth survival game where you have to manage a lot of things. You also have base building, of course, like because most survival games do.
Mm-hmm.
At least the island survival games do. I've actually really been enjoying Grounded. Speaking of survival games,
Mm.
I find that um, that one is a good amount of scary for those who are scared of ant bugs. And I realize that I very much am while I play that game. I think it's very, I think, but I also think it has a lot of fun elements to it, um, which is a blast. So I think I'm finding a pattern that I enjoy the island survival style games, but I also am a huge fan of puzzle games. So I haven't, um, let's see, what are some puzzle game examples? Labyrinthine
Mm.
is not completed yet, but it is very fun. Madison, puzzle game, very
Okay.
good. I enjoy the fear while also trying to solve puzzles. It's so fun. Like
Yes.
Resident Evil, basically all puzzle games.
Mm-hmm.
Those are fun. And I've really, really been getting into those like mocap games, like the Dark Pictures anthology games and the
Mm.
Quarry and stuff like that. Those have been fun, however, very glitchy, but still very fun. What is one more? I feel the need to give one more. Yeah, so there's a game, indie games. There's a game called Sea of Solitude, and it is about depression, and that is emphasized throughout the game in monsters that you have to overcome. And I just find it very fascinating and very engaging. And the it's also an indie developer, and I love indie games. And I
Mm.
love playing them, and then they're actually fantastic. Like, what the heck? But I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to horror games. But I feel, though, as long as it doesn't breach into the over-the-top gore, I'm fine with it.
This is
What is
also,
your favorite
oh,
game?
my favorite. Well, the easy answer is my favorite game is Fear, Fear,
Ah, yeah,
because
okay.
I love to shoot things and I also love a very good horror story. So
Yeah,
basically, any game where it lets me shoot things and have a very good horror story, I'm down. I'm there.
yeah,
But
for sure.
Fear is a big favorite of mine. I just think the level design is fantastic. But also, I am a speedrunner as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, any games that have like really interesting mechanics that I think makes a well designed level to go through, I'm
Yeah.
like always super interested in stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
which
I love
is
that.
which is why it's so funny that which is why we need so desperately a term to separate survival horror from survival horror because
Mm-hmm.
I have a
You
very
say
hard
survival
time.
horror
Yeah.
shooters, and I say survival horror island survival.
Yeah, like I have a hard time getting into survival games. Um
Yeah.
there's just so much I have to think about.
I like thinking about a lot of things,
I
so it makes
know.
sense. It makes sense that I would like it.
I appreciate it, but I also just have this like urge to be like I want to beat the game. And then they're like, "Oh, gotta have your water for the day. And I'm just like, fine, I'll drink the water. Now I'll go beat the game. Now hold on. You gotta have something to eat. And I'm like, all right, now I've eaten. I'm gonna go beat the game. Now chill. You have that wound from yesterday. You're gonna have to wait. Okay, how long do I have to wait? Like 3 days. 3 days?
Yeah, and you're like, what do I do for 3 days? I get it.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, I really loved old 7 Days to Die.
Okay.
Back when I could just, like, basically play Minecraft. And
yeah,
it was just kind of like a base building game. But then they were like, as more updates came out, they're like, no, you have to go out and scavenge and find things to get the knowledge to do things, to build things.
Right.
And I went, no, now it's a survival game.
You're like, I don't want to do this anymore. See, okay, so I think the reason I enjoy these sort of like Desolated Island survival sort of games is because one of my favorite things to do is play The Sims, where I manage everything. So it's like a management game, essentially, that I think just really is interesting to me. I almost said gets me off, but that would have been weird.
Well, I hope you don't stream these games, not on Twitch.
I like to stream games that are scary, but also conversations can be had in the middle of them. But yeah, I gotta say that's kind of where I'm at. So like I limit the kind of things that I like to stream. And I like to also keep games for offline play because I think it's important to have those.
It has been a pleasure talking with you about your opinions on horror and your favorite horror stuff.
It has been so great talking to you. I'm excited to play Vampire.
It worked. Excellent.
It worked. And I'm excited to hopefully have more conversations about recommendations and things with each other. And I hope it was good for you.
Very much so. Before we wrap up here, why don't you plug yourself? Shout yourself out.
Sure. Hi. You've been hearing my voice. My name's Jen, or JenIsOnline. I stream on Twitch Sundays and Wednesdays. That hasn't changed for 2 years. The time has, though. So, you can also find me on YouTube on JenIsOffline. I do vlog content and review content and things over there. I am also the podcast host of The Overprepared DM. You can find that on Spotify. It is a podcast about TTRPGs and how to be a better DM and how not to overprepare for dungeon mastering. And I also have a brand new podcast with my partner, George W. Ambush. We we argue, basically, for about 30 minutes over a topic called Salty and Sweet. It's a fun time. You can tell, obviously, I'm the sweet one. So, but yeah, I do a lot online, and I'm happy that I was able to spend time with you.
I was really happy to spend time with you too, so thank you for joining me.
Of course.
And everyone, thank you for listening. That is going to be it for this episode, but I'll see you on the next one. Farewell, everyone.